was asked to give my thoughts on Logos 9, 6 months in. And you know already that I'm a big Logos geek, continue to tell others to try and be Logos geeks as well. But I thought maybe I would talk a little bit about how I've used it really just in the past week, because I preached last week at a church, and it was unique because of lockdown. I had to do it via Zoom, and so that was very different for me. I wasn't sure how it was going to go, but it ended up going very well, and so I want to explain why I thought it went very well. And so the passage was Mark chapter 5, the Gerasene demoniac. And so if I just go over to my docs here, you'll see it's in my sermon here. Now, because I didn't want to complicate the video sharing, I decided I wouldn't create the slides. So I actually did a minimal number of slides. You'll see here though, so these were just generated automatically. I didn't bother doing any more because I knew I wasn't using it. If I were to preach this another time again, I would work through this and create the slides and then export them as images, which you can easily do in this slides section. You can share it, and then I would share it with whichever church I was preaching at. And I've done that in the past. But again, because I wasn't using slides, I didn't worry too much about that. But you see my entire sermon here. I write out the entirety of my sermons. And so I want to show one thing that I used in Logos that's very unique to Logos, something I've mentioned before. I even have, I think, a dedicated video on it, but I really love it. So I'm going to pop open the NRSV here and remind you how much data is layered within the interlinear Bibles. So if I go to Mark 5 here, and I'll turn these off for now, get all of that out of the way. So when you right click on a word, what did I miss here? So when you right click on a word, any word, you see all of this data. Now, this is a chunky menu, as you see, right? But not only is it a chunky menu with all this data, but if it has this type of mark, if it has this sub menu here, this is all searchable data. So it's just this crazy amount of stuff going on here, right? And it becomes important because, again, you can search these types of things. And so in this case, something that I was interested in is seeing times where the discussions on the demonic, or specifically when Jesus is being asked or talked to in a situation in Mark where it has to do with exorcism or demons or spirits. And so I could do a search here, but what I did instead, because I knew I had it and I've made use of it and I really like it, is I turned to the Bible browser instead. And so, like I said, all of that information, again, on a right click, all of this, a lot of this information, especially in the bottom section here, all of this stuff, including a bunch of this stuff and more, sits available in the Bible browser. So I'm just going to click on that, and I'm going to open the Bible browser here. And so the Bible browser has this whole big menu here. And so you see what I've done. I limited it to Mark, and I can start over. Let me click those out. So you can limit it to the books, and you can either drop down and find it, or you can just type it in here. So like I said, my preaching was on the Gospel of Mark. So let's limit it to Mark. And then remember that I said I wanted to know when people were talking to Jesus within a section that had to do with exorcism or demons or unclean spirits. So the next thing I want to do then is say, where are episodes in Mark where Jesus is addressed? So that's an addressee. Jesus is an addressee there. So I'm just going to type in Jesus. You're going to see I can just look up people, but if I scroll down, you can get a lot more specific, right? So you see you have these subsections of people, places, things, events, defining texts, participants, mention text. So participant setting senses. Here, reported speech. This is getting more specific for me here. So Jesus, I don't want him to be the speaker. I want him to be the addressee. And so now I click on this. And so now you see I'm getting a lot more specific. I'm confined to Mark. This is times when Jesus is talked to. That doesn't mean it's the content of what's being talked about. It's just that he's being talked to. And then we'll do one more, and I'll just type in demon. And you see I have more options. I can choose people, specific defining texts, specific participants, senses, speakers, reported speeches, miracle sections, supernatural beings, topics. I'm going to move this. Sorry, I got to move my video here. You see this here, so topics, types. So I'm just going to click on type here. And you see that it's now gotten me down quite far. And that was far enough for me. I could have kept on going, but this was enough for me to see and recognize that my particular chapter, chapter 5, as I looked through these, you have 3 times in the Gospel of Mark, Mark chapter 1, Mark chapter 3, Mark chapter 5, where demons speak. And so that's why type demon can find these. But then Jesus was addressed, and therefore, because we chose addressees for Jesus, it sits there as well. And so using this Bible browser, I was able to see the times when demons or unclean spirits, because you see Mark 3 here, unclean spirit, where demons or unclean spirits spoke directly, like they actually speak in Mark. And then other times I could see where people were asking about an issue with demon or unclean spirit in the rest of the Gospel of Mark. So that's an example of the Bible browser. And again, it's accessing all of that rich layers of data that sit on an interlinear. And in this Bible browser makes it easier to comb through and filter. You can do the same types of things with searches, but I find that if I want to combine more than one element in looking at the interlinear, and we're not just looking at words, when I want to combine elements, I find the Bible browser a lot easier. So for instance, just to jump back here, so you see here this in verse 7, this is where the demon is speaking to Jesus. And if I right click on the first word of the quotation, you see that I can look down here, and you see demoniac is a person, Jesus is the person here. You can see I can specify when the demoniac is the speaker, but you could see here Jesus as the addressee, right? So I could click that. I could say search for this inline, and then I can specify which book of the Bible I want. Again, so I could go to Mark, which is what I was focused on. And so I can do that same thing, but once you start combining these elements, it becomes a little more difficult because you have to remember the syntax. You see here these squiggly brackets, addressee, then the square, the triangle brackets. So it gets a little more, triangle brackets. So it gets a little more complicated, right? And that's why I like the Bible browser, because you can combine all these, and it's a lot easier to find and work through. And really, I just have fun clicking on these things. It's amazing, again, the amount of data that you can see. So that's the Bible browser, and I use this directly with my sermon, because I talked about the fact that as you look at the Gospel of Mark, in those 3 encounters at the beginning, they are the characters that are first in the story that recognize Jesus as the Son of God. Mark tells us in the very first verse as readers that he's the Son of God, but it's the demons who know who he is. And so you see that, and I saw that and had it confirmed by the Bible browser. The other thing I want to show, so the Bible browser has been around. It's just getting better and better. Logos 9 has made it even better. But one thing that is new in Logos 9 is the preaching function. So back to my last Sunday when I preached, it was on Zoom. It was just like this, where I'm staring at a camera. I stood up. I looked nicer than I do now. I tried to make sure no one was going to interrupt me, all that kind of stuff. And what I did was I used the preach button, which is new, and then it popped open my web here, and then what I did, actually I shouldn't have done that. What I did was I stretched it out like that, and then I pulled it up, and so you see I had a smaller amount, and I put my mouse there so I could just easily click this, and that way I was able to read from here my transcript and see it clearly, and I was essentially maintaining eye contact because I don't need to look that far down to start reading. It was 1997 and I was in a bus in downtown Vancouver, etc. And of course using the timer, and you can make the size, the font, all of that stuff however you wanted it. And so this just became a great setup for me. I felt, I would say, more comfortable preaching like that. Ironic as that sounds, obviously I did not have the interaction, couldn't feed off the people, but because I do whole manuscripts for sermons, I just found that being able to read and feel like I was maintaining eye contact actually worked better. Now that's something for me that I need to work on as a preacher, but nonetheless, the new preaching feature really helped for me. If it had been a live situation, the other great thing is that the sermons are on my iPad, and it's a really nice layout in the way that it functions. If your church uses Proclaim, it can sync with the slides, which is really good. And in a forthcoming version of the Logos app on my iOS device, you can edit the manuscripts directly now, which was not the case before. But it's really helpful for me because I tend to be tinkering with my sermons until the last minute. So you can actually, it's either released now or it's about to be. You can actually edit your sermons right on your iPad, which is iPad or Android, which is really great. So that's my little bit of review and reflection on Logos 9, 6 months in, and I hope you guys are enjoying being a Logos user as well. Lastly, I am an affiliate, and if you feel like saying thank you by buying something from Logos, and you could just use my link, it's a little bit helpful to me. If not, that's fine. I'd rather you use Logos than anything. But right below the video here, you'll see my affiliate link, and you can click purchase, and I get a bit of a thank you, which basically just goes to buying more Logos stuff, because like I said, I'm a Logos geek and a bit of a bibliophile.